Well, it's changed over many years. When I first came into the profession in the early 70s, I think I taught the second Asian American literature course in the entire country, and my students who took Asian American literature from me could not get credit for taking my class as an English major. But at the same time, as an English major at UC Berkeley, I didn't get credit for taking a whole year of American literature towards my major. This is at Berkeley I graduated in 1971. And I took a class in Chekhov, didn't count towards my major. Took a class on African American literature, didn't count towards my major. And just regular American literature didn't count either. So the English major at UC Berkeley was super conservative. You know, they let the Irish in, but you know, they let Yeats in, you know. But it was really, you know, dead British writers, right?
Did they let T.S. Eliot in? They did, right?
Yeah. And then, and obviously, as everyone knows, things began to change.
We've been given legal permission, as it were, to have hyphenation ethnic categories, right, in our birth certificates. So, for example, when I was born, I couldn't say I'm a Singaporean Sikh, but my son, he can say that. If you want. So he can actually say, I'm Singaporean Chinese Sikh, because mother is Chinese, dad Sikh, you know, that kind of thing. So it's only in recent years. So I think the hyphen that you talk about and the relationship between the left side and the right side is going to only get more mature in Singapore as the society evolves. And also the freedoms. We had that protest, remember, Hong Lim Park with 4,000 people, and that was quite a sensation. So more and more, I think people are waking up to it. Maybe that's part of America's contribution, but we inherited a lot from the UK, of course, right, as a colony. And I would say that for someone like me, I mean, 33 years ago when the authorities hauled me up and said that you're campaigning for Singlish, you know, is, and I said, you know, look, do you want to be a second-rate, third-rate, colonial sort of English type, or do you want to evolve a language identity of your own? And I cited America. I said America was one of the first colonies, if not the first, and look what America realized very early in its history, that unless they broke away from English as she spoke, they would never become Americans. And this is why the Webster and all that came along. I mean, people, you know, fought Mark Twain, you know, all those battles with language and all that. So I think the authorities sort of let me alone, you know, using this kind of argument. They didn't fathom all of it, but they were not very convinced. And I think this is part of the ongoing struggle in Singapore as well. Any other person from the floor?
I have a question for American Jazz, which is, we've been talking about freedom of speech, ability to say what we want to say and so on. Particularly in recent years, talking about the last decade, particularly post 9/11. Has the space to speak shrunk? Has it become harder to say certain things as a writer to be published? Do you see that? Do you see that happening? That there are certain things that would not be politically correct to say. You're less likely to get published. You know, it's not any official sanction, but it's sort of unofficial sanction. Is that happening at all?
Well, I would just want to say that freedom of speech is not cost-free. So I make a distinction there. We don't have the freedom of speech to be published by Knopf. We have freedom of speech to say or do whatever we want in regard to speech. There's no guarantee. If you pay a penalty, after all, Americans, if you sacrifice for freedom of speech, so be it. You still are maintaining the value. So I would make a distinction there. I'm interested in everything, of course, everyone is saying. I guess it was interesting where the conversation went to the other side of the hyphen. I was really not. I only mentioned that trying to move over to the right side to say, well, what values do Singaporeans hold? And I think Alvin did address that really nicely at the beginning. And what values do them, what holds this crazy mass of Americans with all these ethnicities? I mean, we have, you know, I think about 1.2%, 3.8 million Chinese Americans. We have 34,000 Malay. We have 2.5% of our population is Jewish. What, you know, we have incredible, it's just sort of an incomprehensible mixture of ethnicities, all clamoring to express themselves and to be in the mix, and rightly so. And that is our vision, actually, of what freedom of speech is. Not that it's cost-free, but just you can do it. And I was really trying to ask what value that has to me. I'm really asking for myself. Is this right? The issue's raised. Like, how is that important to me or to anyone here as a writer to be raised in that kind of ethos or culture? That's really what I'm talking about. That's the question.
Yes, Maura, please remain.
I think that there's always a pressure. There's always been pressure in the United States. Publishing is very concentrated business, and it's run by people who have a certain kind of worldview, and they all pretty much live in the same place. Major commercial publishing in the United States, and there's been some democratization because of small presses and incredible advances in Amazon and everything, which has made $1,000 million boom now. And in fact, a book from a very small house can become prominent, and that makes it even more. But it's so there's certain things going on in the measure of commerce, but there's always been in America an idea that the best way to live is in some way very Yankee, very, very confined to a certain part of the world. I'm talking about the point of view of American publishing as established. It's a very Yankee, I mean, the worldview that you saw in the New Yorker until they started publishing writers who were not from Connecticut, which was not that long ago. Okay? There was probably in the late 70s that they really started publishing people who were not from Connecticut, right, in terms of who was important. And a few, even, you know, so there's always been this pressure in America that there's a certain, and now I would say post 9/11, one of the differences is that there's a real despisal, very, very aggressive despisal of any spiritual point of view. And that has to do with the fact that since religion caused cowards to fall, we can now say we hate all religion. It's a very American stance right now. And so if anybody has any kind of, there's certain prejudices that have evolved post 9/11. They aren't quite the ones we would think, they certainly evolved. And so Americans who are not from that hegemony have always felt, well, I'm not part of that. The first group would have been the Southern writers of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and 50s, who were the first real non-Yankee writers who became prominent. Faulkner,
Right.
Carson McCullers, Eudora Wellington. These people did not originally get published in the U.S. It was much later. So there's always been this one group, and now they have a particular opinion, and they have their evolving political opinion, which is sometimes out of sync with where America is.
Thanks.
Very exciting.
I mean, it's good that the panel has opened up so many new conversations, and I'm sure this conversation is going to continue. But I'm going to ask the panelists very quickly in a couple of minutes, maybe to just share some parting reflections and thoughts, considering all that's gone on so far. Maybe we'll begin with you, Shawn.
Well, I guess my experience today, I went over to a bookstore, Books Actually, and I stayed there for 2 hours. I could not believe what they were publishing. We don't see that kind of publishing in America, you know. Book after book of poetry. People publishing poetry. And you know, I just sort of, in 2 hours, I was giving myself an education in Singaporean literature, you know, contemporary literature. You know, just opening books randomly and reading them and trying to understand, just in one bookstore and one publisher, the range and the depth of literary activity that's going on is eye-opening. Or if any of you have ever been to the Frankfurt Book Fair, you realize how small American publishing is. You know, how tiny it is compared to, let's say, German publishing, where there's, you know, 3 aisles of feminist, you know, literature being published.
And I'll just add to what Shawn was saying, that I think for a long time, far too long, America's been a very insular place, right? Fairly provincial, and I think UNESCO always publishes the list of what percentage of books in translation come out, and in America, I think it's less than 2% of the books that are published are in translation. So there's a real need to bring in other viewpoints and other worldviews, and the kind of exchange that we have happening here, I think, is a real model that needs to happen. We were talking about the kind of post 9/11 space, and an article I sometimes have my classes read it. Some of you might remember this article that Arundhati Roy wrote after 9/11 that was published in The Guardian. It's called The Algebra of Infinite Justice. She wrote it about a week after 9/11, and is a remarkably prescient piece that kind of predicted exactly what would happen with America, that we might go to war with Iran, and that all of these things might happen. And it's kind of piece that I think would never have been able to be published in the US because it felt, frankly, kind of unpatriotic. So to open up a space where there can be this kind of criticism and also an exchange and an absorption of other people's viewpoints, I think, is fundamental and necessary to help transform America in the 21st century.
Just want to share a very vivid memory of visiting City Lights just a few months after 9/11. Actually, this is 2002, and they had, there was all that very fervent and impassioned debate in the media about all sorts of things, and we were at City Lights, and because at City Lights, I had my Ferlinghetti's San Francisco poem signed by Lawrence. And I nearly had my face smashed in by a door opened by Derrida. It's that sort of bookshop. And in front of the more to the point, in front of the bookshop there was this banner that said, "Dissent is not un-American," which I thought was a very strong and beautiful, simple statement. Speech is human. It's not American. It's not Singaporean. It's not European. It is what we do when we want to articulate certain ideas or truths that we have no choice but to say and to share with the world. And I hope that's something that we should continue to hold on to and continue to talk about. What do I hope for the future? I think we should talk more, we should translate more, we should stay in touch in all the ways that writers and publishers and editors stay in touch. We should anthologize each other more. We should collaborate, we should publish each other, invite each other to festivals, have conversations in vineyards and restaurants where we share the treasures of the world, for our bodies and our hearts and minds and souls as well. Continue to relate as human beings, I think. It's a very important way to get past all the other rhetoric and get at what matters to us as writers and as people. But we need to put in the work. We are a fairly long way away from each other, but I think it's not insurmountable. It can happen. Let's make it happen.
Well, I think there is a growing connection now between literary America and Singapore, and that's great hope. The America I grew up with was one that was fiery, questioning against the Vietnam War, and that part of it shaped my own thinking about war, about protest, about looking at concepts like freedom and so on. And I hope that would continue, because that to me is the best part, when people like the Berrigan brothers, went to jail and so on. And that influenced my own first novel, which I call the accidental novel, Rice Bowl. The America I discovered when I was writing residence for 4 months in Iowa was America that had this Midwest heartland that was both Eastern and yet so terribly redneck. And because I my friend and I walked into Walmart, and what I encountered was this whole counter of guns. And the two of us were talking and expressing our shock that the guns were next to the toys. You know, I just couldn't believe it. And when we expressed our negative feelings, one huge guy came up and looked down at us and said that that's American culture, is part of our freedom. And now when I read all these stories about, you know, the gun culture and the helplessness of the president in Washington to change any of that, it saddens me. And I hope that something can be done, because the Americans I encountered in the Midwest, they were wonderful people, wonderful. And yet you have this other culture and the insularity that you encounter, you know. They never heard about us. I was supposed to have come from China, no matter what I said, until I said, Singapore, where your soldiers went for R&R, oh, that's how they saw us, you know. So that one still stuck, and the chewing gum incident, you know. So, but I am glad to see that with our Singapore writers being published in America now, and I see great hope that this conversation will deepen and broaden.
I think it's fair to say that post 2008, a lot of America has suddenly woken up to Singapore, because we've been very aggressive with marketing Singapore, Singapore Airlines, you know, our new Marina Bay Sands casinos, our garden, you know, all kinds of things, night safaris and all that. Also, I think we've been pretty vocal in a number of areas and spaces, and I think apart from, I mean, there's one writer that most Americans would have heard of from Singapore, probably today be Kishore Mahbubani, because, you know, all his political commentaries and quite provocative comments on the political front. This university, by the way, and I take great pride in it, this university was the first university in Singapore to be American-oriented. And so when, you know, we got our 9-month contract, I mean, I'm only paid for 9 months, by the way, by this university. It's like America, all right? So the other 3 months, it's, you know, I'm legitimately allowed to do other things. And so, I mean, NUS and NTU were really fumbling. They didn't know which way to go and all that until Tony Tan actually told them to imitate a little bit more what SMU was trying to set pace. And so I think in terms of the relationships, and therefore I think it's important that this festival is happening here and stays here. I think we probably would be working on a partnership with NUS Yale and bring about a greater literary community that understands both the American and the Singaporean experience and all that. So on that note, I would like to invite all of us to thank our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much. And all of you, thank you so much as well. There's plenty of food out there, plenty of drinks. Help yourselves and continue engaging with these wonderful writers. Thank you so much and good night. Yeah,
Thank you.